This program is supported by a generous gift from the Debbie Wernette Charitable Fund.
Good evening and welcome to A Murder in Montrose at Town Hall. Tonight, in light of all that has recently happened in Florida and beyond, we'll not only be looking at the aftermath of the Paul Broussard case, but we'll also talk of where we are today as a nation, how we have grown together and how we've grown apart, why we continue to have such crimes, and how we can continue to live our lives with respect and safety. Joining me at the table are Executive Director of the Montrose Center, Ann Robeson. Dr. Brian Riedel, Professor of the Practice of Humanities at Rice University. Acting Chief of Police for the Houston Police Department, Martha Montalvo. And Houston City Council Representative for District C, the Mayor Pro Tem, Ellen Cohen. Thank you all for joining me. Now, before we begin, much of the Paul Broussard murder is still debated, and we do want to acknowledge that over the time, the motives of this crime have been re-examined. Community activist Ray Hill and others have come to believe that the crime was not actually a hate crime, but simply a case of an altercation that escalated to the point of deadly violence. But many others still hold firm to the belief that it was in fact a premeditated gay bashing. Our job tonight is not to debate whether or not that's the case, but to take a look at where we are today and how we all plan to move forward. With that said, my first question to Brian, do you find that in all communities there comes the scapegoat, there comes the Paul Broussard, someone that you have to hang your movement on?
I wish it weren't true, but that seems to be the way that public attention gets gathered when so many people do get killed on the streets, like Myra Iqbal back in 2010, a name many Houstonians may have forgotten, a black transgender woman. There was a vigil for her. What happened to the momentum after that moment? Paul Broussard's case was different, as the case we hope in Orlando might be.
So when you say it was different, why do you think it was different? What was it about this particular moment? I know the documentary goes into it a lot, but curious from your point of view.
I think you get about as many different answers to that question as there are people watching the documentary or having the conversation. Yes, it was hot, but he was also a privileged person whose story could sell in a way, in the same way that Matthew Shepard's did, for example. A privileged person whose empathy we could share.
Yeah. And you were here during the time, and actually you were at the center back then. What do you remember of it?
I remember the protests. I remember in horror what had happened. We were scrambling to help the community deal with grief, much as we are right now. And many of our staff were in the streets protesting along with the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it struck the chord it did?
I think that there were things in Montrose that were a powder keg. There was a lot of violence that had happened before that that was maybe not as well known, or it didn't come to a death. And much like what happened in Stonewall, it was like, this is enough. This is it. This is the point at which we're going to fight back.
We mentioned Stonewall in the documentary, and you mentioned again. Can you give, for folks that don't know what Stonewall is, a brief history?
Stonewall Inn is a gay bar in New York that is either has been or is about to become a national monument. And it was raided often by the police, and people were tired of it. It was a hot June night, the end of June, and a riot ensued, and they fought back. And it became the rallying cry for the gay rights movement all over the country. Yeah. It was in 1969, I believe.
Chief, I'm curious, of course, in the beginning of the documentary, the police are not getting that good a rap in our particular show, but it is showing how the police react and learn from these situations and grow. Today, where are we in relations with the different communities?
Oh, I think we've come a very, very long way in terms of relationships. I meet regularly or quarterly with the GLBT community as well as other segments of the community. And I think there's mutual respect in terms of we want to make sure that we are providing the services that we need to with all segments of the community. And it's interesting because I was watching the film and I remember I did not know, for instance, Ray Hill personally, as I do now. But I consider him a friend. So I think that signifies where we've come.
Do we, Mayor Pro Tem, do we learn these things as we go along? Do you see the city learning from each of these steps and reevaluating how we treat communities, or is it something we already know and it's misunderstandings within communities of how government reacts?
Well, I think the government, if we're talking largely about city council and city politics, I think we have come a long way. That said, the fact of the matter is when we passed the Equal Rights Ordinance at City Council, it passed 11-6. So while I'm very passionate about it and I still have trouble understanding why some of my colleagues didn't vote for it, 11 people did, but 6 people did not.
Yeah.
And it should pass 17-zip.
I thought it was interesting at the vigil that they just held for Orlando at City Hall. All of the city council members were there except for the one who wasn't there because of a medical emergency for his wife.
Right, his wife, Councilmember Lee would have been there, but his wife had been in a very bad car accident and she's doing well now. But right, 16 of us, including the mayor, we were there. We were all there.
Yeah, so I think, and the point that I'm trying to get to is it shows...
I don't know if we took a vote that night exactly what would happen, but we were all there.
But it shows the unity, that they're there together for a community.
That's right, and I think the willingness to understand and to work together, but we really do have a lot of education ahead of us.
And we'll see if that unity holds for a while. I mean, it's one thing to show up and express sympathy and thoughts and prayers for people, but it's another thing to take action, and I think that we want to see action. The community wants to see action, and I mean, I don't think we're ready to do HERO again, as you said on the radio this morning. We haven't made a lot of change yet to be able to sway the community, but something's got to show the gay community here in Houston that it's valued and respected and part of the larger conversation.
And I find that hard when you say that, because you look at our city, and as was said actually by Ellen Cohen in our piece, that we had a lesbian mayor for 6 years. So there's obviously an understanding that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but the understanding that gay people can do anything anybody else can. There's not that prejudice. So what is still keeping this human rights part of it back? What do you think it is?
Well, mainstreaming doesn't look the same for all parts of the LGBT community. That's the short answer. Yeah. It's very easy for gender normative people to feel mainstream and non-threatened until someone like them gets shot at a club in Orlando. It's very difficult for someone whose gender identity and expression doesn't look like what everyone else is expecting to feel mainstreamed and welcome in the same way. And there's lots of different variations on that theme we can go into, but not every part of LGBTQ community feels mainstreamed right now.
So then
that's a hard truth.
How do we fix this? There was a piece where, and I'm not sure if it made it into the final cut or not, where we talk about the fact that, this battle is already won because the younger generation isn't thinking the same way as the older voting generation feels. And so a lot of battles will be lost, but eventually the war is already won. It's just time. We have to wait for it.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the younger generation, and I think these facts are correct. I'm sure somebody will check them. But the average age of voters in the last election in Houston was about 68, the average age of voters. The average age of Houstonians is about 34.
You know what?
Okay, so the young people that do get it, that don't see issues around GLBTQ as problematic under any circumstances, great, but they're not voting.
That's the least they can do.
Is vote.
It is so easy. It is so easy. That is the least they can do.
If anybody knows who's in our studio audience, they know who I'm going to right now with this question, because it's finding out, is this accurate or not? Dr. Stephen Kleinberg is with us today in the studio audience, and if anybody would know trends and what's going on, and folks, Dr. Kleinberg, can you address anything on average voting age, and what's going on with all of this?
Ellen is correct.
Thank you, Stephen. That's it.
But
we do our fact checking, but we do it live on air.
No, for sure. When there's this tremendous disjuncture between public opinion, how people answer our questions in the privacy of their homes, and politically effective opinion, who votes, who controls the political apparatus. So the HERO went down to defeat by 69%. 3 months later, we came in our surveys and said, how important do you think it is for the city of Houston to pass a human rights ordinance that would protect people from discrimination? 78% said it's very important to pass that. So 28% of people voted, and it was reframed as a bathroom ordinance. Attitudes are changing rapidly, but how that gets translated into public policy is another question.
When we talk about changing attitudes, as long as I still have you on the spot, difference between us now and 25 years ago.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. We do this survey every year, a random sample of Houstonians drawn exactly the same way, identical questions. Every question we ask about abortion rights has shown no change over these 35 years. Every question about gay rights. So back in 1991, when the film was focused on, we asked the question, said, are you in favor or opposed to allowing homosexuals to legally adopt children? 17% were in favor in 1991. Then it went to 20%, and then 25, 30, 38, 42, 51, and this year 56%. Right? So you can just sort of see that change. That's where we're heading. On the other hand, almost the majority are still opposed and concerned. And the other thing to think about is that as a society changes, people who are opposed to that change get more furious, more worried, more anxious. And so some of the hate crimes come as a reflection of a sense of my country is changing on me, even as the country itself is in fact changing and heading in that direction.
Thank you, Dr. Kleinberg. That brings up an interesting point when we talk about hate crimes and the people's reaction to them. And there's a part in the documentary where Mayor Parker makes reference to, when it happens, there's usually a backlash from the community. But in Houston, the opposite happened. This happened and people came together for it. Chief, do we see that is the way it happens across the board with protests and reactions in Houston, or is Houston very much like other cities and other places?
Well, in terms of protests, obviously when the Broussard murder occurred, I think that was a wake-up call for the Houston Police Department in terms of the LGBT community, in terms of how they viewed that particular murder. And I really appreciated the fact that you showed the aftermath in terms of what the police department did. Mm-hmm. The proactive work that they did, even after they saw the murder. They were going out there, they were, and there was discussion among officers at the time. I think some were quite taken aback by the assaults that occurred to them while they were doing this undercover work. The vice versa program. And I think it was a wake-up call. Where we are 25 years from back, when this occurred, I was there in 1991. The department was very linear in terms of how we thought, how we saw things. Go forward to today, and we're an example of society as a whole. I think there has been some change. There has been a difference of thought. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the police department is more diversified. Mm-hmm. And because we are diversified, there's more inclusiveness, or we view things in terms of being more inclusive. Yeah. So there is a huge change with the department versus back in 1991. I was a young lieutenant at the time. And the thoughts were different, completely different from what they are today. Is it that you change or the organization changes? I think it's both. Mm-hmm. I think it's both. Everybody grows, everybody changes. We have a whole, we're reflective of the community in terms of the department. We're about 52% minority. And so when you bring different peoples, different communities, different train of thoughts, I think people grow. Mm-hmm. Obviously, not everybody is going to change their thought patterns. But I think in terms of management, the organization, that changes. And I think it changed for the best. Yeah. We have called this a town hall, and so it wouldn't be a town hall if I just sit here talking to my guests. So we have some studio questions, and Debbie has a question for us from the audience. If someone can make sure she has her microphone, we will find out what her question is.
So following on the conversation that we were just having there with your last question, I'm interested to know if since the Orlando ordeal, if we have seen, and we don't want to see an exchange of hate for hate, have we seen any increase in crime against the Muslim community?
Yeah,
We have not.
we haven't.
But that doesn't mean that there isn't fear among the Muslim community. They have expressed, representatives have expressed to me concern and fear in terms of what they view as you know, heckling and harassment from the community.
Yeah.
So what we do, the police department obviously does what it has to do to protect all members, you know, of our city. And what I try to relay to them is when these incidents occur that they need to report. I think they're just like every other, like the LGBT community was in 1991, they're afraid to report. They don't have 100% trust in the police. And I think we're trying to you know, change that perception. And by having those conversations and by interacting.
A group that knows an awful lot about this subject would be the folks over at the Holocaust Museum Houston, and in our audience we have Mary Lee Webeck with us. Mary Lee, can you tell us a little bit about how we move past all of this, what we learn from the past and how we move forward?
Yeah, of course, and this is, I think, the grand question that all of us are considering right now. I did a little crowdsourcing in the last couple of days to prepare for coming here tonight. And I sent in a message asking some of my colleagues here in Houston and across the country how they were feeling right now about how a community heals, how we sustain hope in times like this. And not surprisingly, these very, very, very up people that I expected to get, you know, really positive responses from, in many cases responded very sadly and said, I'm stymied right now, I'm frustrated. And these are some of the most articulate people that I know, which is a concern. But I think there is a very, very basic part of human nature that we can't, in our worst moments, put aside. And that's the fact that human beings nurture inside of ourselves always a sense of hope. How we configure that in different moments changes. One of the things that has struck me so much about what's going on in Orlando right now are those beautiful angels, the symbolic angels that have come from the theater community in Orlando that started with Matthew Shepard's murder and shielding the family and the community from hate mongers who were coming to respond. How we do that differs. And I think that one of the things that Anise Parker said in the video tonight was very, very important. You know, how we talk to each other, it changes constantly. And Anne said this tonight too. What we say at different times changes based on our needs, our internal needs, our community needs. One of the things that I've been thinking about in relation to this with Holocaust Museum Houston, we have a very vibrant community of survivors. Those that remain living, of course, chronologically, many of them are no longer with us, but what happened when they first came to Houston is they came together and they formed a community and they talked to each other. And the talk has changed over time based on what the needs are in that community. And that's what happens with us. Brian, you said also that things are changing all the time, and they are. You know, how we think and the questions that we ask have to change based on what rolls in and what happens to us.
And it's a good question, and it's a good point to ask. Are we, especially with city government, is it reactionary or is it leading the way? If you need to make a change, if we see these things, do we have to wait for the populace to be ready for it, or is it something that city government can help to guide?
You mean, are we in front of the parade, or?
I guess you can put it that way.
It's a very interesting question, because I was looking at some of the things that are going on now, and it seems to me that some of our elected officials in Washington are so far behind where the population is, just so incredibly far behind in terms of their votes, the issues of gun control. I mean, it's just unbelievable, their votes, based on what the general population feels. Locally, I think it ebbs and flows. I really think, I think that the elected officials, for the most part, listen to their constituents. And, you know, I have a very unusual constituency. I represent the Montrose, the Heights, mine is a pretty unique group, so I don't have to listen too hard to know exactly what
they
what
let
they're
their
thinking.
voice be heard.
And but I really do think that we have a very advanced group for the most part, and particularly led by the mayor. I mean, the mayor's very, very strong on equal rights. There's no question.
Brian, can change come from just leadership, or does it have to come first from the populace?
It's not a question of order, it's a question of synchronicity. It's a question of people hearing each other, because you can have all the desire in the leadership, but if people won't re-elect them, their voices get taken away from them. Right. And if people won't speak up to their leaders who are not doing what they wish them to do, the same problem happens the other way around. The people's voice gets taken away from them. It's a matter of those voices finding each other. Fortunately, we live in a time when a lot of people's voices can find each other, but it's hard to make it through the noise of, well, do we really need to build a wall? Is that our common concern here? Or do we need something where people's jobs will be protected in an uncertain economy? I think that might resonate a little bit more today.
Yeah. Anne, thoughts?
Well, I wanted to go back to one thing we talked about is what happened after the murder and the positive things and the positive movement. And I keep comparing it to what happened after last summer the Supreme Court granted marriage equality to everybody, and everybody was euphoric. It was fabulous. We had the parade. Everything was wonderful. And then I almost feel like HERO was the backlash. And it was a strong backlash, and I think that the people who were against HERO, the Equal Rights Amendment, Equal Rights Ordinance, had been planning for a long time. And they were very angry because 9 people in the Supreme Court took something that they perceived took something from them. I don't know how, I can't even begin to imagine what they think, how they think that affects their lives. But it was really a very strong backlash. And with the movement that had gone in the populace, along with the legislation, all over the country, the different states that passed marriage equality first to get that groundswell. The movement that went, a lot of it was Human Rights Campaign getting people to come out to their neighbors, getting people to be very visible, getting people to have everybody understand who and what and where gay people were. Well, we didn't do that for the transgender and the gender nonconforming community, and that's the weapon that the people against HERO used. And it just feels like it's a backwards thing to me.
We're going to go back out into the audience. Richard is here, and Richard has a question for us. If we can find Richard and get him the microphone. There we go.
Hi. I want to thank you for doing the documentary. I was at the demonstration in 1991, and I was impressed by the accuracy of it. And I think it's something we all need to keep in our memories. It shouldn't end. The thing about, at the demonstration that wasn't covered, there was a brief showing of the horseback riders, and they were controlling us. They were keeping us in line. And yet they hadn't been there at all to help Paul Broussard. I'd also been attacked. And you know, there was no protection for us. Yet we were being corralled and we were being controlled. And suddenly there arose a demonstration. People started chanting, "Where were you on the night of the 4th? Where were you on the night of the 4th? You're here now, but where were you on the night of the 4th?" And we got so loud and so strong and so close to the patrolmen on horseback, some of them started crying. And you saw it a little differently. It's also interesting because I went to several things concerning Orlando. There was a thing in Herman Park Sunday night, and then the demonstration Wednesday night. And it was a totally different experience because there was no hate, no negativity. It was more about inclusive. It was about love. It was about all of us working together. And even Wednesday night, the last prayer was by a Muslim cleric. They even lit a candle for the shooter. You know, it was totally inclusive. And yet, people threatened the parade here this weekend. People threatened the one in Los Angeles. The shooter in Memorial several weeks ago was making homophobic rants. That was part of his reason for doing that. So, you know, people still see us in a negative way. And we need to change that. And every time somebody says something negative about us, and how is somebody else going to react to it? It may be somebody with a gun. It may be somebody with different leanings, you know, and if suddenly they think everybody is negative, everybody doesn't like gay people, you know, where do they go with that?
Yeah.
And what do we do now to change the perception and include everybody and the acceptance?
Well, I think that goes back to what we're talking about when it comes to education, how you get to the point that people don't fear other people. How do you educate that everyone, there's a point that Walt makes in the documentary where he says, you know, because of the AIDS crisis, people were forced to come out. People started seeing more and more gay people and realized, oh my God, they're all around us and they're just like us. And so I guess it's exposure, education. What leads, I'm going to take this actually out to Martin Kaminsky, who is in our audience with Interfaith Ministries, and actually a question about love. How do you learn to love your neighbor? I mean, how, when they're different than you?
Well, Interfaith Ministries is proud to take the lead in that effort. I was particularly pleased that the mayor asked for our help as we put together the program for June 15th at City Hall. I've been working in the area of community relations for maybe 20, 25 years now, and I would have had to be very, very cautious 25 years ago about who I could have asked to participate in that program and how I might have approached them. And I realized that as I was able to ask ministers, imams, Buddhists, Sikhs, to have the three wise sages, as we call Rabbi Karf, Reverend Lawson, and Archbishop Fiorenza, to come with such open hearts and to speak so bravely and courageously about the need to support people as humans for all different reasons, and to take stands in religions that may not yet be a positive and accepted way of life, that now leaders are beginning to say we must accept each other as humans, we must understand our human condition, and we must come together for respect.
I'm going to spin that question a little bit and go to the woman sitting next to you, to Brittany Birch from the Montrose Center, and ask, how do you deal with fear then? Because a lot of this comes out of fear.
Yeah.
And so from a counseling point of view, what do we do about this?
In terms of those of us that feel the fear and the anxiety that's come, certainly in this past week, 2 weeks, I think coming together and knowing that we're not alone. So I've seen groups come together to talk about the fear that's come up, the anxiety that comes up, and it triggers previous traumas that people have had. And so they're heightened. And some of it is being able to share that with other people that get it, that feel it and can normalize it. And then also to take action if there's action that can be taken. Some of it's going back to routine and grounding in your day-to-day life that is creates a sense of normalcy, because I think we all get thrown off. And I think, you know, I was working with a 18-year-old young woman, and she didn't go through, she doesn't remember 9/11. And she's like, how do I ever stop feeling fear now? And it sort of broke my heart to know that she has to walk through this, and she will. And I said, somehow the bus will come, and the breakfast will be served, and the coffee will be, like, somehow we create normalcy again, and we do it by connecting and coming together. The other thing about fear is also by the unknown. Like, how do we love? Is we get to know each other. We get to know a gay person or a transgender person, and we recognize that they're another person that we, you know, with a human heart. and they don't become the other, they become the us.
But don't we still find that the one we know is okay, but the others are still bad?
Well, and that's what I would like one of our action steps to be, is that the clergy who had such an outpouring of love the last 2 weeks would continue the conversation with the LGBT community like the police department did back in '91. We need to do that because some of that fear is being promoted and continued within the churches. And we need to have that conversation so that they get comfortable with the gay community and the gay community gets comfortable with them.
And I think that is the key. I think education is the key because, I mean, I keep being asked the question, you know, are we going to reintroduce the HERO, you know, the Equal Rights Ordinance? And in my opinion, there's no point reintroducing the Equal Rights Ordinance until we educate the people that voted against it and explain to them what it's all about and take away the element of fear. Because it'll pass, I believe, and it would pass City Council again, but we may end up in the same cycle, taking it to the people, and we'll have the same people voting that voted against it. You know, Houston is the most diverse city in the nation. It is the most diverse city in the nation. But what we have to strive to do is to be the most inclusive.
Dr. Kleinberg, just to verify, are we in fact the most diverse?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
No, and I think that's a key point on this. The most powerful predictor in our surveys of support for gay rights is, do you have a close personal friend who's gay and lesbian? And that has increased from 28% to 49%, and now to 60%, in fact. And that underlies this growing acceptance. And it's not just gays now, it's a broader sense of we are a microcosm of all the world's peoples, of all the world's religions. We are this part of the magic of being in Houston is this remarkable diversity and breadth of enrichment that comes from getting to know people who come from different perspectives. And gay, so it's hard not to be fairly optimistic about this. I mean, you can see us moving toward increasing embrace of this diversity. Yes. But not surprising, not everybody's on board on this. And this is a big change. And what happened in my country? And why is it changing like that? But the vast majority of us are moving in that direction in a very positive way.
When I went to Dr. Kleinberg, I felt I cut you off, Brian. You were about to say something.
Not at all, but to follow these 2 points, it's hard to take Rice students as an example for the entirety of Houston, but the interest in transgender issues on campus is enormously deep. 10 years ago, it was all about LG, right? It was all about lesbians and gays. Bisexuals, we were thinking about them, but this was like, whoa, okay. Now, everyone wants to know about transgender studies. The same is true at University of Houston, where transgender studies have taken off with the LGBT studies minor. So if we take the youth as a kind of barometer who are going to these institutions, I think there is a lot of reason to hope for a very positive change, at least in Houston's future, if not elsewhere too.
If they vote.
But
If they vote.
And
Preach.
how long do we have to wait?
I don't
Till
want to
they
wait
get to
that
be
long.
68, obviously.
Speaking about students, we do mention that we have a website, amurderinmontrose.org. On there are additional materials, extra video footage, and there's actually a video made by a young woman who is here in our audience tonight, which is quite fascinating about the Paul Broussard case. But she has a question for us, so Kerrigan, if you're here, you had a question for us tonight.
Hi, yes. So in the documentary, we see a lot about, a large portion of the Houston community coming together and rallying and trying to bring about change. So how, as young activists, do we get people to come together and try and bring about change without some awful event happening to act as a catalyst?
Anne, want to take that one?
Thanks. Well, I mean, I think we're having conversations all the time in the community. You got to find a place to plug in. And I think that probably the organizations don't do a good enough job of reaching out and letting the greater community know what's going on. But to be honest, there hasn't been a lot of spotlight on the LGBT community from the media until something like this happens. We try to get media about things that we're doing and conversations that we're having in town halls. I mean, we had a town hall meeting with the previous police chief at our place, and we had a decent turnout, but there should have been hundreds of people there to talk to the police chief, and he was there to answer any question possible. So, I mean, I think it's part of, you got to work kind of hard to get plugged in, but I think the organizations have to work hard too to get the word out about what we're doing and what we're trying to
And Ann, I
pull
think
together.
you were right. I mean, I think the religious community has a big responsibility here, and some of the churches, some of the mega churches, need to invite members of the LGBTQ community to their churches. If we need to go where they are, then that's what we need to do. But because talking amongst ourselves, it's nice, feels good, but it's not going to make the changes that we need.
And we're ready to do that.
Well, I have another question from the audience that may be along the same lines. It's from Simon. And where is Simon? There he is. And if they can get a mic to him, we have a question along these lines.
Sure. So there was a point made in the documentary that kind of as equality has increased, kind of assimilation has also increased. And so my question is really just, what is, I guess, the end goal of a movement like this? What does it look like once we have what we have? And then kind of piggybacking on that, the idea that we can assimilate gay culture, is that even possible at this point, this far along in the development of that culture? And if that is the case, then what would that look like also?
I'm guessing Brian can take this one. There you go. Anne's going to help, she says.
Yes,
Okay.
it's a joint effort, because the problem is assimilation does not look like everybody looking like each other. Assimilation looks like everybody understanding how they're different from each other and loving it. That's what assimilation looks like when it's done well. But how do we actually get around to that? I hear glimmers of the answer from Interfaith Ministries and from the Montrose Center, and I hope that this conversation can help spur more of that. And I think, Anne, you might have some thoughts?
You're right. I mean, differences are rich. Our diversity, our different cultures, that's very rich. And people ask me all the time, well, why do we still need an LGBT community center? Why do we still need an LGBT counseling center? I'm like, well, first of all, if you were in my shoes, you would know. But for the same reason, we still have a Jewish family center for services. For the same reason, we have a Jewish community center. Same reason we have a Latino community center.
But
all
could you
of those
argue
things,
those things continue to keep us apart?
No,
Okay,
I
why?
wouldn't argue that. I would say that there's always going to be people within that culture that need a safe space to talk and to heal. And we have gay bars that are disappearing, and some say that's a good thing because people are now comfortable going to other bars, but there's still a need for a gay bar because two men can dance together, they can kiss and hold hands. You're not going to see that for a while in a mainstream bar and not have somebody have an experience about it. But I think that, as Brian says, you need to have, maybe not assimilation, but you need to have people being comfortable and embracing each other's culture, not losing that culture, because all of those cultures are very important, but to be able to share the culture, share the richness and the food and the rituals and the dancing of it, but to preserve it too.
And one thing to add to that is not to feel that all of LGBT culture is one thing. We are amazingly diverse among ourselves.
Right.
And that's been a challenge for us as a movement, is to work with that. And if anything, we can teach that lesson to the broader nation by showing it how we ourselves have worked to overcome it.
Let me ask the chief here. Do you look at the city broken up into just regions, or do you see it as this is that community and that is that community? And when you look at those, do you address issues differently when looking at them? What has assimilation meant to what goes on with your job?
I see assimilation in terms of respect. I have no problem saying I'm a Hispanic female, and I celebrate that. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating that. And there's always going to be individuals that may not appreciate who I am, or even that I wear this uniform. You know, there's going to be individuals that don't like because I wear this uniform. So they may not like me personally because of that, but I do expect and demand that they respect me. And just as I think everyone should demand that they be respected.
But do we look at the city broken up into a Hispanic neighborhood, an African-American neighborhood, a gay neighborhood, and you address issues differently because of the person group that's there, or don't we look at it that way?
Look at it as a city. Now, every segment of the community may have its issues that are separate and apart from each other. But I mean, we don't look at it as this is you know, the GLBT community over here, or this is the Heights. Now, the Heights are very vocal.
I like how the Heights are their own group of people. The Heights are just the Heights. Yes,
everybody knows the Heights. But, you know, everybody wants to have their voice heard. And as a police department, I mean, that's our job, is to find out what are the issues in a particular neighborhood. Because what's an issue in the Heights is not going to be an issue on Northside, you know, near Northside area. It's not going to be the same issue in the Montrose area. It's not going to be the same issue in Sunnyside. So each neighborhood has their own uniqueness. And our job is to try to address those needs.
And the police department has liaisons for each of those communities, though. I mean, one of my staff meets regularly with the chief, and we have a liaison officer that we can call when we have a problem, and we love it because she's been very responsive, and we haven't had that for more than maybe 2 years. So.
Yeah. I know that the next question we're going to take from April in the audience is probably going to come right back to the chief, but we'll find April and April's question.
Yeah, my question was, is the city going to have any special precautions this weekend for the parade?
Yes, as we do this, Pride
Weekend
is coming up as we tape this show, and so?
Well, because of the incident, whenever these type of incidents happen, you know, we reevaluate our plans and we make sure that our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and we are taking additional precautions. Because what we want everybody to have when they come to the parade is we want them to enjoy themselves in a safe manner. And as a police department, that's our job. Our job is to ensure everyone's safety. But we cannot do it by ourselves. Now, even though I'm going to have lots of resources out there, and we are getting assistance from other agencies, which I'm very happy about, other police departments. We got Precinct 1, Precinct 6. So there's going to be other agencies out there assisting us. We're going to have uniform officers. We're going to have officers not in uniform. There's going to be a lot of resources out there. We're going to have canine dogs and their handlers. So there's going to be a lot of police presence. But what we ask everybody is be the eyes and ears. We can't possibly see everything. We can't possibly be everywhere. So if you see something that's suspicious, you see something that perhaps doesn't look right to you, there's going to be plenty of police. Let us know. Let us do what we have to do to make sure that this event is going to be safe and a great event.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, I get the feeling you have something to say on this.
No, I was just going to agree. One, we're encouraging people, the mayor certainly has, to come out and to be at the parade, to show people that we aren't afraid. At the same time, I think it's important, as you said, there will be a lot of uniforms, but there will be a lot of people that are not in uniforms. And finally, I think we have to acknowledge that there may be people who are afraid and whose passion is for the issue, but who just don't feel comfortable coming in. And I think we have to respect that. But you know more about that part than
I am curious, as we get ready to wrap all of this conversation up, and we look back at what happened 25 years ago, and then we look at what happened in Orlando, and I wonder the lessons we've learned, where we've grown from, how you can look at what just happened in Orlando and still say we've made progress. And I'm curious if any of you want to address that.
Oh, well, I mean, there were 10 back then. This is a lone person. I don't think we know everything about his motivations yet, but this was one person who maybe had a mental health problem, maybe had an issue with seeing two men holding hands and kissing. We don't know. But a gang of 10 versus one person, to me, I mean, that sounds like a little less hate. It's probably harder to ferret out and find the lone wolf, and you would not have seen this kind of outpouring all over the country back 25 years ago.
Right. The issue that comes up, we did press for this ahead of time to let people know we were doing this show, and a question like that was asked to me, and what I kept coming back to was the fact that 25 years ago, we were amazed and shocked that gays and straights came together. Yet with this time, that isn't supposed to be shocking. It's expected. You know, it was a crime against people, and that I think that's progress in the right direction.
I think we still have to figure out why some people, and I've said this before, why some people are more comfortable seeing two men holding guns than holding hands. And until we can get past that, we have a long way to go.
Yeah. How do we get to that point? Where do we go? Brian, back to you.
I think it's education, which is the field that so many of us in this room are in. Even if we're only just having that conversation with the person across from us for coffee at the family dinner table, these conversations need to be normal to have, right? Oh, who did you talk to at school today? Who did you meet in your church today? Who was your next door neighbor? Do you know them? When we start having those conversations and LGBT people are normally part of it, I think we're going to go a long way to seeing the difference that Ellen wants.
When we talk about violence too, I wonder, and at times we feel very frightened these days. Chief, are we in a more violent time, or do we just hear more about the crimes that happen?
I think we just hear more about the crimes that happen. You know, when we were talking about, you know, the incident that happened in Orlando, I don't think that just happened. I think people knew. I think people saw the behavior, and I think, you know, it's about education. We need to start talking about these things. We need to start talking about these type of incidents and how people can recognize it, how people can respond to it, so that we can prevent them. And I think a lot of times we're not doing that correctly for whatever reason. You know, the police department has a hate hotline. We have policies, we have training, and those are all the changes we did internally within the police department, which is a great thing. But maybe we need to start doing some of that training outside and getting people educated on what they need to recognize, what they need to see, when they should be alarmed, because people knew about this.
And I think we have to end on that note because we have run out of time. Please remember that you can share your stories, hashtag Montrose 1991, and you can visit our website, amurderinmontrose.org. I'd like to thank all of our guests, the Mayor Pro Tem, and of course, Brian, thank you both for being here. And on the other side, Ann and the Chief, thank you for coming in and joining us. For all of us here at Houston Public Media, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.